I've got an email, Brian, from one of the people. In this case, the people is named James. And we get to talk down to the young folks, and I don't mean it, James. It's all in good fun. But let me read you this email, and you'll get a kick out of it. He said, actually, this is to both me and you. He says, I wonder if Jim has noticed this. I can't believe this is a real thing, but a fan on Twitter told me that depending on if you're a heel or a babyface, you come out of a certain tube. From the camera's view, the left tube is the heel tube and the right tube is the face tube. So when Sammy Guevara hesitated before leaving the stage after quitting the Inner Circle was because he usually uses the heel tube, but he turned face right there by going through the face tube instead. My question to Jim is, has any other promotion had specific entranceways for heels and faces that only smart fans would notice?
And by the way, Cody comes right down the middle because he's a singular man.
Well, he comes right down the middle because his entrance looks better that way, and Moxley comes out of the fucking parking lot because that's what he did the last time he was on a show people watched. But besides that, Brian, it's been so long that now they think that separate baby faces and heels entrances is a secret thing for the smart fans only that is like an Easter egg, as they call them, that they have to discover and note. There are people out there who don't realize that for anywhere in any building or arena that it was practical, that it was possible to do so. For the first 100 years of professional wrestling, the heels and baby faces entered from a different location. There are people now that don't know this and think that because the booking marks, minds behind AEW have fixed the tubes as an homage to the old days. But the thing is that nobody understands who the fuck is coming out of them. And so there is a heel and babyface tube kind of in AEW, but they think that's new and revolutionary.
Yeah, plus, by the way, there's a difference between coming out of a heel or babyface dressing room door and coming out of two tubes that are both connected to the same backstage area.
Yeah, yes, that they show regularly. Yeah. Just to bring everybody up to speed on this, yes, in all wrestling promotions, on the live events, even where practical in a TV studio, in Memphis, the baby faces entered from the sliding doors that connected the studio to the back storage and tape area in WMC TV Channel 5, and the heels entered from the door that connected to the bathrooms and business offices. So the people could see them coming out of different doors in two different parts of the building. In arenas, they would go so far as to come from different ends of the arena. Completely opposite ends of these big buildings. It wasn't, but even in spot shows, I was going to say it wasn't like rec centers where, you had a curtain over one door but even in the smallest National Guard armories or high school gyms, if there were two doors, even if you had to come from the same locker room, the same small room that you were crammed in, and walk all the way around the building in a hallway that people couldn't see, to get to another door, that's the way it worked. Heels and baby faces always came from a different place because the logic obviously was, if these mortal enemies of each other are sharing a locker room, then it's either fake or they should be beating the shit out of each other but as soon as they see each other and not wait for the match. And it was, as we've mentioned, we've told this story before, Bill Watts carried it to such a degree that when Jim Neidhart and Butch Reed had been a tag team, but they split up and Neidhart became a babyface for the last 4 weeks he was in the territory or whatever, to feud with Butch and do a job for him on the way out, they had broken up in Shreveport on television, but the TV tape that they broke up on took 3 or 4 weeks to cycle its way around the entire territory, 16 or 17 markets, everywhere from Houston to Oak City to Little Rock to Tulsa to New Orleans, etc. So during that period of time, since it had already happened, it just hadn't been shown on television, Neidhart couldn't dress with the baby faces or the heels. Watts didn't want him in the same locker room as Butch Reed because they had technically broken up in front of fans 300 miles away. But he certainly didn't want Neidhart in the locker room with the baby faces because he was still a heel on that show, just not teaming with Butch Reed. So poor Neidhart had to dress in whatever janitor's office, broom closet. He actually came out of a goddamn mop closet in the Sam Houston Coliseum one night in front of the fans. And with a mop bucket fucking right behind him as he closed the door. I watched him do it. Because that was more real and yes, if you know, the same thing at the Louisville Gardens when I was a kid, you would see clearly the baby faces came out of the left side of the rear entrance ways and the heels came out of the right. Now, of course, as soon as you went back there, the stairs went downstairs where the locker rooms were all connected, but only people that had actually worked in Louisville Gardens or been security for or whatever, which is a small percentage of the town at that point in time, had ever been down there. So they didn't know. So, they're good guys' locker room and the bad guys' locker room. And that's the way it was. And then when wrestling got a budget, when, you know, Vince wanted to be Walt Disney and TBS took over, and I always thought it was so ironic that the exact time that we started getting these giant stages that the fans couldn't climb and these big, wide, 20-foot wide entranceways down the middle of ringside where nobody can reach you or even touch you, coincided with the exact moment where all the heels lost all their real heat and nobody gave a fuck to want to try to take a swing at you. In all the years that we were fucking going through these goddamn crowded fucking arenas, that with 3-foot wide aisleways going to the ring in these dark buildings with 2 fucking off-duty cops sometimes. Police coverage ranged from excellent to practically non-existent, depending on the town. And you have to fight your way sometimes there and most times back. And we couldn't get any help. But then as soon as TV takes over and they've got a budget and everything's phony and nobody gives a shit about trying to attack anybody, fuck, the president gets closer to the fucking public than the wrestlers do on their entrances now. But no, that's what started everybody coming out from the same place was the television entrance stage and ramp. And then so there were no more territories. So the promoters that got in the business to replace them started building their buildings as they were seeing on television. And like I've said with AEW and so many other programs, you can't tell who the babyface and heels are to begin with. And sometimes they actively try to make sure you can't, which is insane. So there's no reason to even try it now. But yes, there is apparently an homage on AEW to a babyface and a heel tube that goes backstage and connects to the same place, just like the gorilla position in the WWE that they've established. They even have the long walks with the guys. They started doing it with the Goldberg and WCW and whatever the fuck, where they will show you walk right past and through the curtain way, and everybody would have to be congregated in that same area. So once they've shown you that, it makes it look especially stupid when these guys here. Besides, I've said no DQ is lazy booking, but here's another thing: lazy booking. Fight off. You know what I'm talking about, Brian. That's what they'll give you the. I've actually heard finish meetings in recent years where they will actually just tell the guys, and they automatically know because it's done so much, and you guys get together and just fight off. You know what that means, right?
No, what does it mean?
Get in a fight and leave the whole goddamn building. Never be seen again. Fight off. Just fight off. Which, the Bill Watts in me, every time I hear that, wants to scream the invisible wall, because that's the first thing I learned when I got to Mid-South Wrestling. You would get fined if somebody hit the ring to make a save and the heels bailing out hit the floor and then stopped, and the baby faces didn't go out after them. Watts would call the invisible wall rule, where he'd say, "You fucking idiots, what an invisible wall just come up out of the ground and prevent you from going after them? Why were you so mad going into the ring and they jump out, they're 10 feet away, you don't go after them? What the fuck's the matter with you?" Because he was right. And it made everybody look stupid. So when you were bailing, you bailed and you got the fuck out of there. You didn't stand around and bury the baby faces. If you got away quick enough, the baby faces could stay there and check on their fallen comrade instead of rushing after you because you were fucking gone. And it's the same thing here. It just fight off. How many times do you see in these matches, you've got 6 or 8 people and all of a sudden 3/4 of the match gets in a fight on the floor and they fight up to the stage or down the tube or wherever, and they just fight off and you never see them again. And then whoever does the finish. And there's no... That didn't used to happen for one particularly logistical reason. If you wouldn't ever do it at a spot show or in a small building in front of, 1,000 people or whatever. If you were in a big building and doing an angle like that, the guys would have had to got together and fought down a 80 or 100-foot aisleway and out of a major arena, and it would have distracted so much from what the fuck was going on in the ring. And then where would those people have gone? Why doesn't one side should come back? Are we expected to believe they do this in Seg 6 and we never see those people again? Are they still fighting in the parking lot somewhere? Shouldn't we have an update? If they're not still fighting, then why didn't somebody come back? Usually the winner comes back, doesn't they, Brian? But in this case, nobody ever comes back. Invisible wall.
Hey, you mentioned earlier the stage and the ramp, and that's something that's been everywhere since the mid-90s. Raw, Nitro, then eventually even ECW, Ring of Honor. We see it now with AEW. Impact has had it for years. What are your thoughts on that? On the idea of a stage that wrestlers come out to? And in WWE, they all have their individual pose that they do, which is ridiculous. And then they come down the ramp. Do you have a preference? Do you like the stage, or do you think the stage is counterproductive? What are your thoughts?
Well, it is a television production. And pay-per-view used to even have a bigger, as you'll remember, had a bigger set than television because there was more money in pay-per-view back in those days. I don't mind some element of television presentation. And especially, when the WWE started making the big stages, the really big stages, is when they started selling fewer tickets and they had more room in the building. Remember, during the Attitude Era, things were, it looked good, but it was still not as big as these goddamn football fields now. And I'm not talking about now during the COVID era, where they've got all the room in the world. But sometimes they go so crazy with the themes, the Halloween shows with the bales of hay and the ghosts and the spooks, or just the ridiculous over-themed stagey sets that looks more like one of these game shows where, average marks run through an obstacle course full of foam rubber things that knocks them into mud. The UFC manages to have big major pay-per-views and big events and still make it a major television spectacle and still have the goddamn fighter's entrance through an arena, right? So I don't mind the big background sets if they're not too hokey. I think the stage takes up a lot of room. I'd rather be selling those tickets. I obviously don't mind poses and shit because that's been a staple of wrestling since Buddy Rogers got in the ring and fucking, did his thing with his cape, or Gorgeous George with the robe, or whatever the fuck. But when everybody has their goddamn cue and their spot they have to hit for their pose so the pyro can go off in the perfect place behind them in the exact same order every time, And it takes any kind of spontaneity out of it and any kind of energy of this guy is just a fired up fucker coming down there. Entrances used to be more for the heels really than the baby faces. And then the rock and roll tag teams, the Fabs and the rock and roll and everything started changing that. But entrances used to be for the heel to come out and get some fucking heat from the people by just being himself and walking to the ring and being him. And then the babyface could come out and just be an all-American guy. But yes, I know for the television era, they have to be juiced up. But at the same time, they've wrung a lot of just the legitimacy and the connection with the people because you're doing the same thing every time in every building in front of every crowd. And that was never the case when you just went out and did your entrance based on and even in the days of music, guys still weren't doing the same entrance. They're playing the same music, but they're coming out and they're playing off of what they've got in that environment. And it's just more choreographed, predetermined, pre-patterned cookie cutter type of thing instead of letting guys be more real.
See, I love it. I love the visual of a wrestler coming out with building security guards around them through a slim aisleway. It just looks more energetic, looks more exciting. But the other thing is with the staging and
it's a whole lot more energetic when you're on that slim aisle with those security guards coming through that fucking crowd. It's very energetic.
No one today has to worry about anything when it comes to heat, so it would work. But the other thing is when it comes to the staging and what you said, it's all television production. One of the worst things about wrestling the last several years, and the pandemic has kind of boosted this a lot, but even when it was, when it was Raw on the road every week, going to a different location, every building looks the same. Every building is set up the same. Nothing seems different or special. If you watched a Raw and then didn't watch again for 6 months and watched it, it would look just like the show that you saw 6 months ago. And I think that sucks. I always like the buildings all having their own look. The Garden had its own look. The Mid-South Coliseum had its own look. Every building had its own look. Now every building is set up to look exactly the same on TV.
In those days, you could go to different towns in the same territory with the same guys. It would almost be like being in a different wrestling territory because all the buildings were different. Most of the ring announcers were different. The fans were different. It was a whole different experience. And now, like you said, every company that has any kind of a budget to try to imitate everybody else looks the same. And also, there's something to be said when you've got, once again, I know there's no fans for the last year, but in the previous 20 years, when you've had fans in the building, but you barely see them, you see mostly the entrance or the wide aisleway or the aisle wide way. I want to just know that there is a sea of people around the ring, but when the match starts, I like it when the lights go down and the focus is on the ring and you hear the people reacting. It's more UFC-like, it's more boxing-like, it's more fight-like than I'm not talking about the atrocious Thunderdome with those colorful cutouts that give you a fucking aneurysm to watch, but just they've lit the crowd to the point where between the lit up entranceway and stage and the lit up crowd and the light, it's brighter outside the ring than it is inside the ring. It's like going to the movies and when the show starts, they turn the lights up. Anyway, so I'm understand it's a television production and things evolve, but bells and whistles don't have to be tied to everything but the actual product that you're televising. That's my belief. But anyway, different fucking entranceways for the heels and the baby faces. Who could have thought that would ever be a thing, Brian? Imagine that. If all the guys had been in the same locker room, imagine all the fights and the injuries and the people getting hurt and kidnapped. What they would have needed every night if they only had one locker room for all these guys, the enemies, to dress in the same room with each other, they would have needed a crate of Omax every night just to be able to get through that.
Who doesn't? I could use a crate of Omax right now.
Here in a minute, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear the sound of Brian Lass sucking on some Omax Cryo-Freeze roll-on to try to alleviate and ameliorate his tooth pain. But folks, if you've got aches and pains from arthritis, backaches, muscle soreness, joint pain, and you want to try a drug-free solution, unlike my merry prankster co-host here, you owe it to yourself to try the product that you're probably hearing about on every news outlet. It's the Omax Cryo-Freeze. We've been talking about them for a year or two now. Whether it's your back, your neck, your hands, any painful area besides your teeth, gums, and also your sphincter, don't do that. It will reduce inflammation, improve muscle and joint flexibility. The super cold menthol and the hemp CBD, it provides relief quick, and it lasts up to 8 hours longer than any other roll-on, and this stuff is great. Every product that Omax has is great. The one-a-day supplements, the sport cream, but the Cryo-Freeze is the grandpappy. And right now, Omax is offering my listeners 20% off on a 1-month supply of Omax Cryo-Freeze, and that 20% discount applies to any product site-wide. Go to Omax, O-M-A-X, health.com right now and enter the code JCE, omaxhealth.com. Enter the code JCE. You'll get 20% off the Omax Cryo-Freeze or site-wide, anything they got. No messy creams, horrible fragrances. This stuff works. Just roll it over where it hurts and ice out the pain. omaxhealth.com, the code JCE, 20% off. I don't know how we continue to bring these incredible deals, Brian, to the unsuspecting public.